This is the Unit 1 review. It's the first test of the year for Algebra 2. I'm glad you're watching the video. That means you're being proactive. Alright, so the first thing we're talking about is domain and range. So I'll make domain yellow and I'm going to make range blue. Okay, so domain is all about the x-axis. So when I'm looking at the domain, I'm only focused on that x-axis. Now, you can tell that as this is going up, it's also going to go out forever. And as this is going down, it's also going to keep on going out forever. So this graph here will actually reach negative infinity, and it'll also go all the way to positive infinity. So if I write that as an inequality, I'm going to have negative infinity is less than x, which is less than infinity. And you don't ever use the less than or equal to on the infinity. That's a no-no. Alright, on set notation, I'm going to build my set for the domain. Okay, and then I'm going to put my solution within that set. So negative infinity is less than x, which is less than infinity. For interval, you always want to use parentheses on infinity because we don't know exactly what the value is. You only want to use brackets when you know exactly what the value is. Now for range, that's all about low to high. And if you take a look at this, you can tell this arrow will forever go down, which means that this arrow here will forever go up. So the range here is actually going to be the same thing, except I'm going to use a y this time because it's range. And again, I'm still going to use parentheses because you never use brackets on it. Now, other graphs that will also have this same information is going to be a line. So those are going to be like your linear functions. And then remember, as an equation, they can look something like this, where you have your slope and your y-intercept. Okay? Alright, on the next one, this will be the last one that I do with you. Again, my domain is going to be yellow, and then my range will be blue. So again, domain is how far something goes from left to right. So left to right. So if I go to the very left of this graph, it's right here on the x-axis. And then if I go all the way to the left and then all the way to the right, there's an open dot right there. Okay, so if I write that as an inequality, this goes out to negative 1, negative 2, negative 3, negative 4, negative 5. So negative 5 is less than or equal to x. Again, I'm using the less than or equal to because of that closed dot there, and which is less than 2, 3, 4, 5. And I'm using just the less than there because of the open dot. So remember in class we talked about these faces, and these kind of will tell you which things to use. Alright, so as far as set notation goes, I'm going to build my set. And then remember, the only thing that goes in the set is the inequality, so I'm just going to rewrite that. And then for my interval, because this one is a closed dot, I'm going to use the bracket. But then if I go to the right, that's the open dot, and that's where I'm going to use a parenthesis. Alright, for my range here, I'm looking for low to high. The lowest it goes is 0, and then it goes all the way up here, but then it has an open dot there. So if I write that as an inequality, it's going to start off with 0. It's a closed dot, so less than or equal to y, which is less than and all the way to 6. And again, I'm only using less than because of the open dot. Alright, set notation, I'm going to put that in. And then for my interval, again, I start with a bracket, and I end with a parenthesis because of the open dot. Alright, so we talked about this one down here. This is going to be a line. It's extremely important that you get a picture for this. If you don't know what this looks like, you have to know what it looks like. So remember in class, I was telling you, it's easy from a picture, it's easy from a picture, it's easy from a picture. But then once you get down here to equation, if you don't know that that's going to graph a line, you have to put it in your calculator. So for this one, an interval, this will go forever left and right. And this will go forever up and down. Alright, on this side here are going to be your linear regressions. So for this one here, I'm only going to do this one. Okay, so the first thing I have to do is I need to turn on my stat. So I'm going to go to mode, and then I'm going to go down to stat diagnostics and turn it on. Okay, so now I'll be able to get that R value. And then I'm going to go to stat and edit, and then I'm just going to start inputting all these values. So give me a moment to do that. Okay. Alright, so I inputted all that data. So now what I'm going to do is they're asking me to write the linear function. So they want me to run the linear regression. Now they'll also call it a model. Okay, so I'm going to go to stat calc and go down to linreg. Oops, accidentally did quad. Here we go, number 4. And there's my equation. So I'm going to round the equation or the model to the nearest hundredths. So here I'm going to have y equals 4.19x minus 163.41. Now it doesn't ask for the r squared value, but I am going to write that down. So remember that here is called your coefficient of determination. And I'm running out of room there. Okay, so for that r squared value, I'm going to round it to the 10,000ths. So that's going to be, for that r squared there, it's going to be 0.7019. And that's not that strong of a relationship if you think about it. That's only about 70%. So that's not a, extremely strong relationship. Okay, so this says, predict the ice cream sales if the temperature was 97 degrees. Okay, so I know the sales are going to be my y. Okay, so I don't know what that is. But I do know my temperature is 97, so that's where x equals 97. So I'm going to go to my calculator and put in my equation. Okay, I'm going to go to my table. Now again, I don't want to scroll down to 97, so I'm going to use that second window and just go to 97, where x is 97. I go back to my table. And so if it's 97 degrees out, they're predicting that they're going to get $243.02. Now this also says, what would you expect the temperature? So again, I don't know the temperature, so I don't know my x. When the sales are 215, so I know that y is 215. Alright, so if I look at this here, I'm going to go look for where y is 215. So it's somewhere about right here. So what I could say is when it's probably, I don't know, between 90 and 91 degrees. So between 90 and 91 degrees. Really the most important part here, y'all, is really making sure you know which is the x and which is the y. That's extremely important. Okay, on this one here it says write the equation of the inverse. So remember, when you're doing the inverse, as soon as you see that word inverse, y'all have got to think of switch or flip. You have to think of that. It has to be switch or flip. Okay, so the first thing I have to do here is I have to change that to y equals. Now, I haven't done this part yet. So that's what I'm about to do. So I'm going to take that x and that y, and I'm going to flip them. So I'm going to do it over here so I have a little bit more room. So x equals 2/3 y plus 1. I'm going to subtract 1. That gives me x minus 1 equals 2/3 y. And again, we multiply by the reciprocal. Okay, and whatever I do on one side, I do to the other side. So remember, the one thing I'm always telling y'all is I'm kind of concerned y'all are going to forget that part. So y equals 3/2 x minus 1. And then if I write it in that inverse notation, that's my inverse. Oh, yeah. Alright, on this one here, I'm not going to do number 7 with you. I'd like for you to try that one on your own. Again, you see that word inverse. So those should be flipping and solve for y. Okay, on this one here, they're giving you the graph 2x plus 1, and they want me to determine the equation of f of negative 1. So this here tells me that I'm doing the inverse. So what I'm going to have to now do is I'm going to need to take this, and I'm going to write the inverse of it. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to change that to y. And now I need to make sure I flip because I'm doing the inverse. So x equals 2y plus 1. All right, minus 1 minus 1. That gives me x minus 1 equals 2y. Divide by 2, divide by 2. Okay, so I now have y equals 1/2 x minus 1/2. So if I write that in that inverse notation, that's what I have. Now, here they want me to actually find the value of f of negative 1 when x is negative 10. So I'm going to take that inverse here. Okay, I'm going to take the inverse, and I'm going to substitute that in, and I'm going to see what I get. Okay, so that's negative 5 minus 1/2. So that gives me negative 5 1/2. Now, you also need to graph this, okay? So if I'm going to graph this here, all right, if you're not good at graphing, I would suggest that you just come here and put this in the calculator. And if you do that, you can just pick a couple points. Alright, so if you type that in, just pick a couple points. So you know there's going to be a y-intercept, because here's the y-intercept at 0, negative 1/2, so somewhere around here. Okay, and then what I could do is I can rise 1, run 2, or put a point at 1, 0. Okay, and then just connect those. And again, the main idea here is that this should reflect over this line. Now, there could be some human error with the way I graphed it, but it should reflect over that line, y equals x, because all inverses reflect over that line. You have to do that. All right, so on this one here, you're just predicting if they are inverses of each other. Okay, so if they're inverses of each other, when I rewrite that, it should equal that. So I'm going to rewrite this a little bit differently. I see that it's really 1/4 x plus 1/4. Okay, so I'm going to start solving this one. I'm going to change that to y equals 4x minus 1. Okay, again, I see that word inverse, so I need to flip. So that gives me x equals 4y minus 1. And add 1, add 1. That gives me x plus 1 equals 4y. I'm going to divide by 4. Divide by 4. Now, you can kind of see, if you look at this closely, you can kind of tell that that and that are kind of looking like each other. So now what I have is I have y equals, there's a 1 in front of there, so 1/4 x plus 1/4, and they do end up matching each other, so that they are inverses of each other. Yes, they are inverses. Okay, on the back it just kind of starts talking about more linear regressions and stuff. Just remember that coefficient of determination is just that r² value. Okay, and then on the back here for this one, on this one here is a couple different ways to do it. You could, because you're doing an inverse, you could solve for this. Okay, so if you solve for it, again, I switch the x and the y, and I'm just solving for y now. And I'm going to make sure you divide by that negative 4. So what that now gives me is y equals negative 1/4 x minus 1/2. So that's my inverse. Okay, so if I go here and put that into y equals, okay, and then I'm just going to look for the table that matches. Okay, so I should see a 0 and a negative 1/2. Well, that won't work. Alright, because that has 0, 1. Now that has 0, 1 again, so that's not going to work. Now here we go. Here's a 2, negative 1. Okay, so that works. Here, let's see, look at the negatives. There's a negative 2, 0. There's a negative 6, 1. And there's a negative 10, 2. Now the other way to look at it is if you just put this original one in. If you put the original one in and then go back to your table, remember they're inverses. So if this is the original equation, you're looking for the points that are flipped. So if this has the point, negative 2, 6, this should have the point 6, negative 2. So for instance here, this has the point negative 1, 2, but since this is the inverse, this should have the point 2, negative 1. Okay, same thing. If this has the point 0, negative 2, the inverse should have 2, 0. If this has the point 1, negative 6, this should have the point negative 6, 1. Because remember, they're inverses. We're flipping. And again, if this has the point 2, negative 10, the inverse should have negative 10, 2. All right, so that's the review. Make sure you ask questions if you need to. If you're one of my students, you can get a hold of me through Remind 101. And good luck.